welcome on the Call of Duty commentator and analyst, Mr. Chance, to Off the Break today. Chance, my friend, how are things?
No, things kind of suck, Landon. Things kind of suck, but how are you?
Things are good, man. Things are maybe a little bit better over here, maybe in my neck of the woods. But you know what's great is that we're actually talking on some COD history today, right? You came to me with this subject. We wanted to kind of talk on some COD history and kind of bring up something pretty interesting today. So we kind of are going to be, I guess you could say, hitting this from a few different perspectives. And obviously, it's kind of open to interpretation. So if there are those who obviously want to kind of get involved, you can feel free to comment on this video. You can feel free to tweet at either one of us and kind of let us know your thoughts on this subject, which is what? Going to be the biggest impact a single tournament has had on a player's career. Chance, do you want to kind of expand upon this idea or how we're going to be kind of evaluating different players and events that we've brought up?
Yeah, I think the idea just started of like, I think it might have just been Kleenex of like, he burst onto the scene. We didn't know his name until champs for Black Ops 4. And then just because of that one tournament, he ends up like on Toronto Ultra, gets picked up into the franchise league, like out of nowhere, just about. And then he goes on, like eventually getting picked up, put on like the starting roster, has like a great deal of success. And it literally stems just from that like one single tournament is what got him there. And like that, it's just an insane story. Dude's coming over from like Denmark, now living in Canada. It's strange. It's particular. It has that like one real like identifiable moment in someone's career to make that massive of an impact. And I thought it'd be cool to like see how you could integrate that throughout different storylines, different players over the years, and see where it takes us.
Well, absolutely, man. I think it's going to be a great conversation, and I think really we can kind of quickly brief over what is the most recent one, as you just elaborated kind of on it. Kleenex's run right at Black Ops 4 champs, what he was able to do with Singularity. When you kind of talk about the overall placement, someone could say, oh, well, you know, whatever. But still, just the overall impact, the plays that he was making. I actually went back and watched a few of those clips, and I remember, I think it was you who commentated over the upset that they had versus Envy. I think it was in that series. I think you actually were casting over it, which I thought was pretty interesting just to kind of see your perspective on things. And it really was the Kleenex show. I think like after that day, everybody was on this guy Kleenex, and that obviously led to him getting the substitute position with Toronto Ultra, like you mentioned, and then obviously later gets to start, obviously wins a home series to kind of end out the year. And honestly, it's probably one of the hottest prospects coming into next season, and something that I think is great for the Ultra because they're obviously going to have him locked in for next season. So again, kind of from your perspective on what he did in that event, I guess we've seen players do that before, right? There have been guys who've kind of showed up and kind of been, you know, amazing at an event, but I feel like Kleenex's as of late was probably one of the most impressive that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember this almost from just a storyline perspective of like they started winning games. We're like, who's this guy? He has a funny name. Then we started running with the tagline of like the tissue is an issue.
Yeah.
And like it was just a very fun section of the tournament on like a day one through day 3. Like they only got top 12. It's not a meteoric placement, although very impressive since they're coming over like not being a part of the Pro League the entire year. But it was just like that magic, just that like 3 or 4 day period where they had it champs, where we just like were witnessing some like small like essence of greatness. And now obviously that he's in the league, potentially that can butt over time. But it was just a really fun part of that tournament that I think anyone that kept up with it throughout like the 5-day stretch that it was, everyone knows about like the Kleenex story in that regard. Like it was just a fun thing. And now obviously he's in the show.
Yeah, he definitely is. I actually remember being at that event and kind of hearing a bunch of noise because everyone was already surprised that Envy was kind of in the position that they were. And then obviously when Singularity kind of rolls through, I remember like actually watching it on a screen like far away from where I was because I forget what game that I was doing. But I was like, really, like they're actually doing this. Like you could kind of see like things starting to form. And that event was already unbelievable. I think, at least for me, it's probably the craziest event I've ever seen in Call of Duty esports history. I think it's up for debate, but just to see that kind of contribute to it, I think is one of the many interesting layers of what was Black Ops 4 champs. Now I want to bring up one personally, and I obviously want you to comment on it. I want you to kind of bring up your own as well. But I want to bring back a gym, probably one of the older ones that we're going to talk about. I think one event that had a massive impact on what is considered to be one of the greatest players of all time, being Clayster, was at the MLG Winter Championship back in 2013. Now, again, there may be people who instantly know exactly what I'm talking about. There may be people that are very curious as to where exactly, what exactly is this event. Was in Black Ops 2, and this was really Clayster's showing out period, because I've actually heard a few different players talk on this, and specifically players from Complexity during that kind of time period, because this was the event that put him on the map. This was the event where he was playing with guys like Slacked and Spacely and Huddle to kind of qualify Clayster for champs, because those guys were all underage, and they were fully aware that, hey, we are trying to qualify Clayster for champs. Clay then goes on to play at champs with a bunch of European players, guys like Gunshi. But this event was kind of the breakout moment for someone like Clay. And as somebody who had kind of heard of Clayster a little bit kind of throughout my career, I remember hearing, obviously, way more noise about him right before he got picked up by Complexity, and this was kind of the moment, this was kind of the show-out period where I think teams like Complexity, teams like OPTIC Gaming, of which he actually 3-0'd OPTIC in this tournament, I think this was kind of his come-out period, and I think this is kind of what highlighted and kind of got a major start for what is obviously one of the greatest players of all time in Clayster, a recent back-to-back world champion. And so for me, this was an event that I don't remember 100%, but I do remember seeing the ponytail, right? Clayster, kind of his history and what he was able to do. And I think this was probably the event that put him on the map the most.
And what event was this you're saying? The MLG like Winter Championships one?
Yep, 2013, yeah.
And like, yeah, so I don't know the history that well, so I'm just like having a look at this. But yeah, like get second there, and like he like popped up a few times, had been competing, a couple top 24s, top 28s, and then like obviously at XP he made a decent chunk of change, but that's just like a weird event. And it literally goes from like that MLG event, then he plays for Unite with all the European guys at Champs. And immediately after that goes to Complexity, and then just a ton of first places. History, right? The legacy gets built, just like everything. So that is honestly a pretty good clear cut of like he was always a good player, but then after this tournament is when like the Complexity just plucked him and we're like, hey, we're just gonna be the best from now on. Is that cool with you? Clay was like, sure, dude, I'm down. Let's do this. That's a great time.
And I think it was recently, I want to say it was Krim. I think it was Krim. It may have been Aches. I'm almost positive it was Crim6 who recently was talking on kind of the impact that one player makes to a team. I want to say it was on the Eavesdrop most recently, and he had talked about kind of the decision for how they were before Clay versus how they were after Clay, because it was kind of like top fours. It was kind of losing in finals, but I think it was a majority of the time it was kind of top four positions where they would just miss out on being in that grand final, and when they added somebody like Clay, it was obviously the piece that managed to make him into the dynasty, probably one of the greatest dynasties, obviously, of all time. That's another conversation, obviously, but still majorly led to one of the craziest runs that we've ever seen. So definitely an interesting one. Chance, hit me with one, buddy. What's a major impact player from a tournament specifically?
I'm going with General for this one. And I think he is like almost in the same vein as Kleenex. It's like, I know nothing about this guy, never heard of him before. Then boom, has that one tournament at UMG Cali back there in Advanced Warfare where they just come out and place third. And like, if you go back and even look at General's career as a whole, he starts in AW. There's like an essence of like a couple online 2Ks, like local lands, like it's a little bit there. But then like the first real event he participates in was UMG California, gets third place. And I remember that tournament just because that was like everyone collectively being like, who are these guys? Then they get third. And then obviously like, after that, the team doesn't have quite as much success. There's a bounce back, but it was a moment for General, burst on the scene, had just like the clear-cut evidence, I am capable of playing at the highest level. And then since then, I mean, in IW had a couple top 6 placings, obviously got picked up on one of the CDL teams. And I don't know exactly what his future holds for next year, but like is still a player I have to imagine most people think or just know he's still very capable of playing at the absolute highest level. And it was just that even after like UMG Cali, he's playing and the entire team was just like at the time unknown, playing with Kate Ruiz and Exhib. And then it was very quickly after that, players like Proofy and John and Parasite were like, I want to play with this guy. I don't know who he is, but he is sick. And it just, you start to get in the mix of like playing with more of like the pros, get in the mix and match. And it was just a cool moment. UMG Cali, 2015.
Yeah, that's a great call. I actually do remember. I mean, there's so many different memories from Advanced Warfare specifically. I think that was probably one of the greatest kind of years of competitive that we've ever had in terms of just the sheer amount of tournaments that we had, the amount of young players that kind of started to arise, guys like General specifically. And I do remember kind of hearing about him a little bit coming into that tournament, because I remember like they had the Onslaught group, and there was like a group in particular who I kept hearing were like running these local Michigan tournaments. And I have no idea how I heard of this, because before then I was not familiar with MES whatsoever. And so I think they helped put MES on the map, at least in terms of the start. And then kind of from there, obviously they instantly come through. They what is this before Champs, UNG California? I don't even remember. Was this after Champs or before Champs?
I'm pretty sure it was after Champs, just because looking at his page, like he didn't even play at AW Champs.
So it's like you had the Team Revenge situation at Champs, and then just after that, then you have this random team group of players that we've never heard of before. And what is Enigma 6's first ever event, which is kind of crazy to think about as well. And for him to perform that way is insane. And wasn't UMG Cali, was that the first event that the OPTIC Dynasty played at? Was it UMG Cali? I'm almost positive that was the first, like with Nade, obviously in the lineup. I think it was.
So it didn't have Nade, it had Karma, and they did win the event.
Yeah. That was an insane one.
I can't remember his first, not sure.
Yeah. The only reason why I remember that is because Dallas is my first event that I ever casted. And I was like, wow, it'd be really cool if I could have been at Cali, because that was the first event with Karma. And then, wow, yeah, that's a good pick, Chance. That's a solid one. That wasn't one that instantly entered my mind, but that's a solid choice.
Yeah, and I will say, like, obviously, like, who knows how someone's career would shape after that. Like, maybe it wasn't the biggest impact and he'd have been able to, like, get towards the CDL eventually anyway. But it's just, it can be very difficult for teams if you're playing with unknown players. You have to have that, like, meteoric, like, placement for, like, the other pros to start and want to play with you and pick you up. Yeah. And it's weird because he started playing with the old pros, didn't have a lot of success, goes back to sort of that, like, Michigan sort of, like, pool of players that, like, dominate the MES scene and stuff like that. And that's when he came back in IW and started playing with your Protos, your Royalties, back with M. Ruiz. Cade was in the mix as well. And that was when they were just like one of the top teams, like throughout a chunk of IW. And it's just with that like weird core group of like, they're not the biggest names, but like as soon as they got there, they just hung around.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Well, that's a solid pick. I'm going to go and move on to another one myself. And I'm going to go with one that, because I think when we give the definition of like the biggest impact on a player's career, a lot of people instantly associate with something that's positive. And this does have a positive kick to it at the end. But I will say this for me probably is one of the craziest storylines or one of the craziest timelines that we've ever seen in COD history, which is back at the Pro League qualifier in Black Ops 3. It is Apathy on the Team Liquid squad with him and Study and Merc. So this was a massive kind of moment for them in time, because they are trying to qualify to get into the league. A roster that was kind of surprised wasn't already in it. A group of guys who was kind of labeled as the top kind of amateur team that plays well at South Carolina. There's a lot of hype around them. And then they come into this Pro League qualifier, in which it's a best of 7. You have one best of 7. They're facing off against H2K, who is relegated. And what happens is that they go up 3-0, and then they get reverse swept. And I think it was either the second or the third time up to that point in COD history that we had ever seen a best of 7 reverse sweep. And funny enough, I think that the next series right after this one also became a reverse sweep in a best of 7, which is really weird. But still, this for me obviously is negative at first, because you're thinking of someone like Apathy, a guy who now has 2 world championships, regarded as one of the greatest of all time. I know hasn't had the greatest stint recently with the Seattle Surge, but kind of turned a negative situation into a positive one, because despite, I remember, losing this best of 7, he ends up becoming the most coveted free agent. Team Liquid decides to drop the entire team once they don't qualify, and that allows, I believe for at this moment, like Merc then retires, at least soon after. Burns ends up retiring. Study kind of obviously starts to kind of progress on his own way, but Apathy becomes the most coveted free agent, and then from there, joins alongside Team Envy in a situation of which Envy was supposed to grab Diabolic from Dream Team. And you think about where Diabolic obviously is now in terms of, Apathy still playing. You think about the major differences there. He joins alongside Envy to kind of close out the year. John joins the team as well, and they end up winning a world championship, by far the biggest defining moment in Apathy's career. And so for him to lose in that moment is obviously negative, but it probably has the biggest impact on his career, because if he stays with that Liquid team, probably doesn't go on to win champs that season. That's at least just my interpretation. But I think joins the Envy team, Obviously, one of the craziest performances that we've seen in a very long time. One of the major players for that roster as well, and leading to a championship. And so for me, that definitely always sticks out in my mind of like, what if they would have won? But also at the same time, imagine if things would have been different. OPTIC probably doesn't win a championship that year, and maybe isn't regarded as one of the greatest of all time now.
Yeah, I mean, like this could be like a separate episode of just talking about like the biggest what ifs in Call of Duty history, but like that's got to be up there because like literally knocking on the devil's door. Like I have no idea what his state of mind is, but obviously if quite a few players on that team ended up retiring fairly quickly after like the Team Liquid did not like pan out, and he turns that into a world championship, like that is very close to being at the very bottom, like just the dismal end of the career.
Yeah.
And then you accomplish like one of the most impressive things. Like you have one of the best accolades or the best accolade you can have in Call of Duty. And that is a very quick turnaround as well. So I agree. That's just, if not just an impressive what if, like a very good, this one tournament, like that could have been the dagger. And then nope, world champ, we're there.
Exactly, man. Exactly. You got one for me?
Oh God, where are we at? Yeah. So this is the next two I have are actually sort of like a bit of like a triplet kind of category.
Sure.
And the first one is the gunless RCDs and Burstini at CDL Atlanta for IW, whatever year that was. I don't know, 2016, 2017. I think 2016. Was it 2017? Yeah, it was 2017. Okay, yeah, in February. But that was very much, and I will say if I have to pick one of the three, I would pick gunless for this just because if you paid a great deal of attention to the amateur scene, you would at least have like a recognition of these three players, more so Pristini and RCD because they like placed top 24 at champs the year before. I think they had like 1 or 2 top 12. So like they were sort of known and like almost in the mix. But then that CDL Atlanta event comes out of nowhere. That was like the year where OPTIC Gaming was just straight up the best and expected to be the best and had all this success like the year before, not counting champs, like whatever. But then like these like unknown players effectively, and then Silly with the attachment to it, just like sort of come out of nowhere, take it to them. You have the hype moments for the crowd, like doesn't like they know who to cheer for because they're cheering for OPTIC, and like Persini after they win is like screaming at them, and like that was the tournament that introduced at least those three players because Silly has already been around for a long time, and I don't want to attach Silly to it because like the tournament for him is definitely winning like a world championship in World War II.
Yeah.
But that was the tournament that put these guys on the map, and for the next couple of years, Gunless at any given point was the best player in the game. Pristini and RCDs go on to win world championship years later, and like ever since they've had that tournament, they have consistently been at the top, consistently been like a staple. And in my mind, they basically come out of nowhere. Like, I think 0 people outside of like their friends and family would have ever picked them to win that tournament. And then they pull it off and just, I just remember like even that back-to-back from CDL Atlanta to like CDL Dallas, when it's like the 2 grand finals that were OPTIC versus United, that was nuts. And like, honestly, bringing up United is interesting too, because like they put United on the map, or at least like my own personal map. And like as soon as they got introduced, they were just always around and never really went away.
That's I think for sure one of the greatest, I would say one of the craziest events, because I remember being there for that event, and then to kind of see where those guys are at in their career, including all 4 of them, as you mentioned with Silly as well. But you look at where all of them are right now in terms of their career being in the CDL, it had a lasting effect. And like you mentioned as well, not only did it have an impact on specifically Gunless, Arcides, and Pristini, but as well it also launched to be one of the biggest organizations in COD, obviously until 2019, where they departed before franchising into United. But still, like that event was insane. And I remember they actually had a few different battles as well. It was like that. I think it was Atlanta that started it off, and I want to say that they faced in another grand final. It might have been like, I remember it was one not too long after that. They also had a battle with OPTIC in the finals and ended up losing it. But that event specifically, I remember was one of the craziest crowds I had ever seen, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say that it went to a second best of 5. I think
both the grand finals and like back-to-back CDL tournaments from United and OPTIC Gaming went to double best of 5s, I'm pretty sure.
Wow, that's crazy. That's an interesting one. Yeah, wow.
And again, like even just looking at it from like RCD's perspective, it's like in Black Ops 3 gets like a top 12, which is great.
Apotheon,
Champs gets
right?
top 24, which is like, with the Apotheon and like respectable. And then the first tournament IW gets top 12. So like he was close, but that's only 3 tournaments deep. And then the next one he wins. And it's like the Twins get their win, Gunless gets their win. And then after that, it's just a whole cacophony of top 4 placings, top 2, top 6. Like they are always just in the mix from that point. Best player of the game accolades for Gunless, world champs for the other 2 at a certain point. And like that's the tournament that put those guys on the map.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about because even a lot of people didn't know a ton. And I say this carefully. Like Silly was known for sure, but I think this also really kind of escalated his career because I remember one of my biggest notes was like I remember Silly from like AW Isolation Empire. I don't know why that just always like resonates with me, but I remember that. I think that this win as well really kind of defined him as being the veteran leader because, again, like you said, you have 3 guys who aren't very well known at all. I had known a little bit about Aristides and Pristini with like their time on Gosu crew, I think it was. And I remember hearing like about a little bit of drama that happened with them, like a prior champs. I guess it had to be the champs before this. But still, without question, one of the craziest events. And I remember for sure never hearing about Gunless in my life. I was like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know why I don't know who this guy is. But to have him kind of, start off the way that he did with this team and to, like you said, be kind of defined as probably a guy who's defined as probably one of the best players in every single title since. It's insane, man. It's insane. Any final thoughts on this? Because I feel like this could be a totally separate video. I know we need to move on, but any kind of final thoughts about this event?
The only final thing I'll say is like the only reason I don't include Silly in that group is because he had a very solid career before that with a ton of top 8s sprinkled in, like top 2s here and there with your Cloud9s, your ISO Empire. Like it was the defining tournament for 3 of those guys, but Silly in my mind had like already been on the map, already been around. Even if that is like one of the most impressive wins of his career, it's still in my mind less of a flash sort of, I guess, would be the race compared to the other 3.
Yeah, that's a great call.
So what do you got for me, Lando? What's the next one?
All right, next one for me, at least the final one for me, is going to be the event that took place kind of around this time period where we're already at 2017. It is OPTIC's win at IW Champs, specifically the impact that it had on somebody like Scump. And the reason why I bring up Scump specifically is obviously because it's his first world championship, obviously his only world championship, but just in general, it is his first win, obviously in this grand of a stage. You talk about the other players, kind of the impact that it has on them, but specifically because 2 of them have already won a world championship, this legitimized everything that I feel like he had been working for so long. Because I'd heard the OPTIC players talk about this post the IW champs win, 2017 champs win. This was their last opportunity because they were at each other's throats. So it's like you talk about this probably was his not only best chance, or you could argue there's a few other years, but in general, this was his last opportunity to win a champs and with the dynasty. Because if you think this team doesn't win, what happens at that point, right? What happens in terms of the player situations? What happens in terms of his career? Because I think that the OPTIC team would still be considered a dynasty, even though we give this stigma of like, oh, they have to win a world championship, which I agree with. But I think that you would make the case for OPTIC to still be a dynasty, but you think more heavily on the fact of the amount of disappointments. They don't win it in AW. They don't win it in Black Ops 3. Another call that you obviously have. Another situation in IW. They don't win it here. That's 3 champs in a row, and I get that Nadeshot was a part of the AW one, but 3 champs in a row specifically for Scump. He can't get it done in the biggest stage. I mean, the amount of things that happen if he does not win here is insane. And I think kind of from that moment, it legitimized his talent, the fact that it could show he could win on the brightest stage, OPTIC could win on the brightest stage. And like, again, all that he had worked for, being such a solid player, kind of stepping aside a little bit and allowing for someone like Formal to kind of be that player, which I think is without question one of the greatest performances we've ever seen is Formal at Champs in 2017. So I think that you could kind of argue it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest storyline in Call of Duty esports history. And I think the guy at the forefront, the guy who had affected the most, is the guy who helped build the brand in the first place, which is Scump.
Yeah, I will be pedantic and criticize the use of the word legitimize because I think anyone that is being neutral, not biased, isn't either a massive OPTIC Gaming fan or a massive OPTIC Gaming hater, knows that like Scump is just either the best player in the world or one of the best players in the world for a very long time. Like there was no need for him to need like the legitimization of his career. Like that was already established. I remember Hex used to talk about it back in the day. He's like, everybody just keeps talking about champs as if the other 20 tournaments they had already won at that point, like, were worth nothing. And I agree with like that sentiment. But either way, just getting that tournament, it quashes the counter narrative of Scump sucks because he can't win champs. He's not clutch. It quashes the narrative of like OPTIC Gaming, even for Hex, like that organization for years. That had been like that final goal to get to, just to get that like final establishment, get that trophy, and just be like, boom, we've now done everything. We have every accolade, every accomplishment. There is no more justification for anyone to be a hater, at least until the next year. And then it just kicks back up again. But it was just, it's what, you know, 80%, 70% of the entire community had been thirsting for years. And they had always been close or like in the ballpark or in the conversation. And like, that was the tournament just to get all of that out of the way. So that's just like a massive, like tension point within the entire like competitive Call of Duty community of just like waiting for that moment to happen. That's when it gets through. And that is like, I'm sure brings tears to so many OPTIC Gaming fans and the haters and people that hate Scump. I remember reading tweets all the time of like every single tournament win and be like, it doesn't matter, not champs. Like that guy sucks, which makes zero sense. But like that was just part of the narrative. And that was the moment where it gets axed out. So absolutely, that is by far one of the most impactful tournaments in Call of Duty history.
Yeah, and I want to go back really quickly. Whenever I say, you know, again, whenever I say the word legitimize, whenever I use that word, and you kind of brought it up very well, I don't mean that, for example, all the other events don't count. I just mean that in terms of like the arguments, which you brought it up, all of the argument's sake that could say, oh, well, he didn't win this, or he didn't do this. Like I said, that kind of gets squandered in terms of where that lies. And I think that does heavily impact him when we talk about the greatest players of all time, because he's already regarded as that. But if he doesn't win the world championship, I think that there is a huge stigma that, hey, this OPTIC team that won so many events couldn't do it on the brightest stage. They couldn't, you know, take down somebody like Aches, for example, and how that kind of storyline progresses. I think that it is a much different career outlook. I think that it is still one filled with success, but that champs win, I think, means more than anything in regards to his career, and I think really kind of helps progress a lot of different things. So I want to make that clear really quickly in terms of, you know.
So, I'm not criticizing you at all. I started with I am being pedantic, but that's just because the, like, if I was Scump or Hex or, like, a part of that, and I'd be like, I'm sorry, legitimize what? Like, bitch?
Right,
like,
no, exactly, 100%.
Yeah, it's 100%. Just, it's that type of thing.
Right, exactly. Well, like I said, big one here for Scump. Do you have any kind of any final thoughts, any final tournament moments possibly for us?
Yeah, I'll throw out two more, and I'll try to do it a little bit quicker. I think you have to tip the cap to AW Champs, to Team Revenge. And like specifically, again, there's like sort of a trio in my mind of Nagafen, Vicento, and Aqua mainly. Remy was a part of it and had a little bit of success after. But it's really Aqua is probably the standout guy, and Naga right behind him. That is an event in Ants Warfare, just because Jetpack's first time, whatever, has like quite a few of these, effectively came out of nowhere. These guys had not played in a ton of tournaments before, and it's just boom, at Champs, they get second place. They were the team that figured out uplink like the fastest off the rip. They had some of the flashiest plays, and that was like the CleanX story condensed into a team was Team Revenge, of just like, that was a tournament where like one of the storylines no one was prepared for. It was like, who the hell are these guys? They are disgusting. They changed the game, at least in the period that they had, and it was just an incredibly fun thing to watch. And then after that, that was like the starting point for Aqua, who has been a staple of the pro community for years after that. Ever since then, we've seen Nagafen, who definitely has more ups and downs, but like when there's ups, it's constantly getting, you know, the second place finishes, top fours in the mix, like always towards the top. And even Vicento had a very strong career, and he's moved on to potentially for him greener pastures, but like, that is another one of those tournaments in the same vein as the E United for CDL Atlanta back in IW, of this is the tournament that puts them on the map. Ever since then, these guys have at the very least been in the mix.
Yeah, that's a great call, because I think a lot of people, when you think about champs, right, and you think about like the grand final of champs, I feel like a lot of people actually don't reference the AW one very often, because a lot of people forget the Denial team that ended up winning it, and more specifically the Team Revenge roster. And I feel like you know, there are times when people will reference, oh, remember that Revenge roster back in the day, but not a whole lot of people remember the run. They don't remember how dramatic of a situation that was because, like you mentioned, you know, the things with like Enigma 6, for example, hadn't happened yet. There were guys that were kind of starting to sprout up a little bit, your TJs, your Temps, your Hooks, but just in general, this was kind of like the core, and the year specifically, that kind of changed COD forever in terms of like, hey, these young players can actually work together and be very good. It's not, you don't just have to have, you know, X name here or X name there. You can still have like a group of guys who can still be somewhat unknown and kind of lead yourself all the way to a Champs Grand Final, which does go to a Game 5, by the way, which is pretty interesting as well in terms of, you know, what could have happened. But still, I think, you know, that is a champs that sometimes kind of gets swept under the rug. I think a lot of people bring up, you know, the 2017 champs. Obviously, you can bring up the most recent one, obviously in light of memory. And I always remember the Envy one, kind of the start of the CWL, that kind of situation versus Splice, maybe the original. But I feel like this is one that kind of doesn't get talked about enough, and specifically doesn't get talked about enough is the run that this Revenge group make in terms of this situation. And without a doubt, as you called it, has an insane impact on their career because you don't just have to win an event to kind of change your career forever, but without a doubt, an event that that definitely made a major impact on a lot of people. So.
Yeah, and then like even just looking at Aqua's page, it's literally like his first event was UMG Orlando 4AW, gets top 16, which is like fine, but nothing impressive. Then it's they qualified for champs, and then boom, second place.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like again, if you get that good of a placement at champs, that is guaranteed for a few years. Like you're gonna be around.
Yeah.
You know, even if you start performing poorly, if you do that good at a certain point, people are gonna keep you around because they know what like they can get out of you type thing. And it's just, yeah, I mean, everything you said is true. It's just a very easily identifiable moment, very early tournament that genuinely changed the landscape, at least like a shift. Maybe not the most dramatic shift of all time, but they made their impact and had solid careers after that.
100%.
The best bow I could put on that. I lost my train of thought, but that's okay.
You're good, man. And that core as well sticks together for a while. Like you kind of have a little bit of a mix match here and there. Like I know like guys like Fellow kind of start to slip into the lineup coming into the later years. So that definitely was a spark that that definitely helped progress them a lot in terms of their careers. Again, like I said, a few players kind of, you know, in some ways go off and do different things, but overall that core, the majority of those players stuck around them for a while. I think what, you have another one or is that
I have one more.
Okay, I was going to say, I want to make sure we didn't lose that. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the one that like I don't know the history nearly well enough, and it's a little bit trickier to find like it was this tournament because there really is no just one tournament. But I'm gonna roll with MLG Dallas 2011 back in Black Ops 1, and the player I'm looking at is Hastro. Hastro, for those of you who like forgot, was a pro player back in the day, even though he's like 10 years older than everybody else, whatever it was, and he commentated at a certain point. But from the brief career that he had, which started in like COD 4 or whatever, Black Ops 1 is where it ended. And so when Hastro's playing career ends, that's when he like becomes like the guy for Envy, the true team owner. And then he is gone from, I mean, post-playing career, team owner, most world championships, I think, as an organization that he is now transferred into the CDL to be at least partial owner or CEO, whatever his title is for the Dallas Empire, makes that team a world championship team. Like, whatever the dismal end to his playing career was, or like the heartbreaking moments in Black Ops 1, if it was MLG Dallas or MLG Columbus after that, as soon as his playing career ends, the just incredibly impressive, just again, like team owner kind of role just takes off, has a ridiculous amount of success and accolades behind that. And again, if we're talking about like a single tournament that impacts like the landscape of Call of Duty, Hastro has absolutely left his mark. So whichever one of those tournaments was like solidified the end of at least the playing career has to be one of the most important Call of Duty like tournaments of all time. Even though, conceptually it sort of falls out if you think about it, to where like I'm sure it was like a long time coming, whatever.
Sure.
But it's still fun to think about.
That's a very interesting one because again, someone like Hastro, which I maybe could possibly see him walking by at some point, but throughout this, but in terms of like the amount of hats that he's worn as well, because a lot of people know him to obviously be organization owner, Team Envy, Dallas Empire, obviously a number of different esports and stuff, but like, the amount of hats that he's worn. I remember him saying the other day, and I didn't actually know this, I heard him say the other day that he worked with Vaughn in Black Ops 2 to make Hardpoint. Like, didn't know that myself. Like, you think about the amount of things that himself, even guys like Hex as well, the impact that they've had, but obviously as you label it, what he's kind of done post being a professional player to then being a commentator to then, the amount of things that he's done to be a coach at some point. Like, he has worn every single hat that can be worn, and I think that's an excellent call, one that I think maybe a lot of people don't instantly think about. Like, everyone knows that, like, for the most part, Stro is a prior player, but I think that's a really good call, especially for somebody who's had such a massive impact on the scene like he has. So that's a great call, man. That was one that did not ring in my mind whatsoever, but that's probably one of the better ones, I think.
Yeah, I think thematically we have like the Kleenexes and maybe General would fall in this category of, or like the AW and the United as well, of like these guys come out, have a crazy tournament, their careers are now vastly different after that. Like that was like the starting point. You have the Scump sort of conversation where it's like a ridiculous career the whole time, but this is the one tournament that completely changed the landscape of all the narratives that are surrounding it and answered whatever question. Like it was just a defining moment in Call of Duty history. Yeah. And then I think the player, like the Hastro angle is cool as well. Just take someone that has just a ridiculous amount of impact on the Call of Duty scene as a whole. But he was a pro at some point. So like at some point that switch had to be made for whatever reason. So I just like the question. I just think it's a cool thing to go through the history books and look at all these like defining moments throughout either player's career, team's career, or the entire landscape as a whole, and how everything shifts around.
Absolutely. I know this has kind of turned into almost like a little mini podcast, if you will, but I think this has been fun. Like I obviously, you know me, I love Call of Duty esports history, and obviously as the scene has kind of developed over the years, there are so many incredible stories, things that I think a lot of the time have kind of gone under the radar because of the amount of roster changes, stories that have happened recently. I think it's easy to forget. And there's also a lot of people that I see all the time kind of who tweet or make reference of this idea of like, hey, I came into the scene in, AW, or I came into the scene in, Infinite Warfare, for example. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you don't know all of these things, and that needs to be, expressed to you. So I think subjects like these, topics like these are great, and I think we should definitely do some more of these, my friend.
Yeah, no, I agree. I came in and seen like AW, and there's still like again, you brought up like the Clayster thing, and even that I was like, didn't really know that. Like had like a vague awareness, but it's just as soon as you get past or before AW for me, I just don't know nearly as much. It's much more like scattered. So I think everyone has that. Like the number of people that probably tune in for the first time in the CDL that just have no idea what's going on and completely miss whatever sort of storyline it's going to be. It's just, there's just so much there. There's always a lot to unpack, Landon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I personally came into the scene in like around the Black Ops 1 time, MW3, Black Ops 2, like kind of around that rough time period in general. And whenever I hear guys start talking about, MW2 cups and COD 4 stuff, I'm just like, no idea. Absolutely zero clue in terms of like where a lot of those things go. But yeah, just in general, man, I want to ask you one last thing before we really close this thing out. One kind of final thought.
Sure.
I feel like one of the biggest storylines coming into this next season is going to be Clayster with the subliners. Obviously departs the Dallas Empire due to this change from 5v5 to 4v4. In this example, we talk about an impact on a player's career, and I know you could kind of go a few different directions with this, and maybe this is just an entirely new video in itself, which probably will turn into one. If Clay manages to win 3 in a row, 3 different teams, gets 3 rings, wait, am I lost here? No, 4 rings in general. Where do you think that possibly could be in the conversation for one of the biggest impact ever? Because granted, he's already won 3, he's won back-to-back, but to win 3, to do it in the way that he's done it, and arguably what is going to be the hardest past few seasons that we've ever had. I know that it's probably way too early to call, but in short, do you think it has the ability to join this list? And again, I know that there's a lot of things that are going to happen that change the way that we think about things, but that is one that enters my mind where I'm thinking that could be a conversation next season where we're looking at it and saying, yeah, that one gets added to the list.
I don't know if that would directly apply to like the one tournament being like the seismic shift and anyone, just because Clay had like the seismic shift, won champs, had another seismic shift get dropped, come back, wins champs the next year. I think the conversation would be different of we have had for however many years now. It is like the top 3 Call of Duty players of all time, in whatever order you want, would be Crim, Carmen, Scump. And that's like undeniable. You have to have those 3 at the top. You can argue about the order. And now, like, I lean towards Crim just because of this past year and say, like, he is my number 1. And now Clay, because he's gone back to back, has like injected himself to be very in the realm of that conversation. But like, you know, if you don't have him in your top 3, that's fine, because obviously a ton more wins for the other guys. But if you go 3 years back to back to back world champs with the crazy set of circumstances he's had to deal with, like, that might be number 1 GOAT status, because then you could start making the argument, like, back in phase, he was one of the only guys to be able to like stop that OPTIC dynasty team. Like, who knows, man? I think if anything, Clay has now put himself in an incredibly strong position to just like take over potentially, like the GOAT argument. And I don't know if that would actually do it, just because, you know, Crim has so many more tournament wins, Scump has more tournament wins. Like, I don't know if going for that 3 is enough to make it happen, but by God, it'll make it interesting. And you'd have to pay a lot more attention to it, certainly.
It definitely will, man. Without question, one of the biggest storylines, something that we'll have a big focus on for sure. The spotlight will be on Clay moving into this next season, as we'll kind of continue on with the interesting storylines, maybe even some COD history when we talk about future off the break segments, things of this nature. But Chance, thank you so much for bringing this idea out and for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Landon. Always a good time.